Welcome to Vermont State University's These Things Matter, a podcast series with Aurora, Assistant Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Social Justice, Outreach and Accountability, and Mary, Assistant Director of Multilingual Student Services. In our first episode, we will be delving into the important topic of gender diversity and the experiences of students at Vermont State University. Please join us today to explore the historical development of gender diversity definitions, gender and language orientation, gender-based challenges, and available resources related to gender diversity on our campuses.
Wow, to kick things off, let's take a journey through a historical development of gender diversity in higher educations. So, societal attitudes towards gender diversity on campuses in the United States have evolved, I believe, seeing a significant shift towards co-education. Definitely, we can see a trajectory from exclusion and limited opportunity for women to a more inclusive approach that acknowledges the diverse experiences of all genders.
That's correct. And we see that starting in 1972 with Title IX of the Education Amendments, which prohibited gender-based discrimination in education. There was then an increased emphasis of addressing gender disparities in STEM fields, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, as well as promoting women's leadership and participation in other typically male-dominated disciplines. As a societal awareness and acceptance now of LGBTQ plus identities, which continues to grow, colleges and universities have begun to address the needs of transgender and non-binary students when thinking about gender equity in a larger context. We also are seeing a really interesting trend with a shift towards more women than men entering higher education. We can see this at Vermont State University itself, with 44% of our students being male and 39% of new enrolled students being male. This, of course, doesn't mean the other percentage is all women. The university has non-binary students, though that can be a little harder to track due to state and federal regulations around gender identity being a bit different from each other.
That is so interesting, Aurora. But I'm wondering, would you mind clarifying again how students could better understanding the meaning of the labels, such as genders and non-binary student?
That is such a great question. So the term transgender means someone who identifies as a gender different from what they were assigned at birth. There is another term, cisgender, which means someone who does identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. There are binary trans people, trans men, and trans women, and there are also non-binary trans people. Those people whose identity falls outside of that binary. I will use myself as an example. When I was born, the doctors and my parents assigned me the gender of female. However, I am not a woman, and that is not how I identify myself. I'm also not a man, so I use the term non-binary to describe myself. This also means that I'm transgender and non-binary.
So in that case, what would be an approach on the first day of classes, let's say? First day of classes are always, challenging. So on those days, when a new friend refers themselves as genders and non-binary student, should be the approach here?
That is a really great question. And really the most important thing is to listen and respect what your friend is saying. Take your cues from them of how they want to be referred to as. The biggest way is to make sure to use the name that they have introduced themselves as and use the pronouns that they use for themselves. Let's look at an example where someone else might refer to your friend with the incorrect pronouns. That can be really hard for your friend. And if it's another student who made the mistake and you feel comfortable, you can say in that moment, actually, my friend's pronouns are. If it is a situation that might be a little bit harder, say with a professor or maybe a different power dynamic, that can be a little uncomfortable. So check in with your friend after and ask them if there's anything you can do, how you might be able to support them. One way that you could do that is ask if they would be comfortable with you correcting the teacher next time or if they would want you to help them do that themselves.
So from your answer, gender diversity is often understood as a spectrum rather than a simple binary concept. Traditional notion of gender as strictly male or female have been challenged by a growing recognition that gender is not solely determined by biological sex, but is instead a complex and multifaceted aspect of identity.
Yes, gender is definitely a spectrum, and that doesn't necessarily mean a straight line between men on one end and women on the other, but it really is more nebulous. Male and female aren't opposites, just two different sexes, and men and women, two different gender identities. The idea of there being binary genders comes from society, with what we think of as kind of Western societies. But historically, there have been cultures who understood that gender identity was not binary and had different societal norms that represented that. This belief in a binary is kind of a social construct, something that was created by humans that has real-world ramifications. It also comes from a misunderstanding at times of what we think of as biological sex as binary itself, male and female, when really there are intersex identities as well. And people's identity, though, is really important to them and should be respected, and that's really the most important thing.
So, could you shed light on what gender diversity means and is wrong in the context of higher education at our university? What were some key recent milestones in achieving more inclusive campus?
So, gender diversity is really grounded in gender equity, where we see all genders represented and represented equally. This is not just campus-wide, but this also has to do with specific degree programs and fields. There are still fields that are dominated by men, often STEM, or women, such as nursing or education. So ways to really establish campuses with equity is ensuring everyone has access to the same things, from bathrooms to dorms. Vermont State University has a number of gender-inclusive dorms and housing policies to ensure students feel like they belong, which has been a really great development. There's also importance in kind of our digital world within our university, and Vermont State University is working to ensure that our systems are able to actively and accurately represent students and employees by having 4 gender options. And those options are man, woman, non-binary, and other.
So, to ensure gender equity in a classroom, I think faculty members could consider some following strategies and questions and apply it to different scenarios in their academic teaching. For example, they can ask themselves, how do I promote gender equity in terms of voice and participations? Some strategies that they can use is, instead of invite the first person whoever raising his or her hand or their hand, they can use wait think time then deliberately. So instead of calling on the first or second hand, then they could become more mindful and take some time for themselves to think how they could address the students and balance the participation of everybody's. They can use some inclusive language, and I think it's so important is changing from welcome ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, into something more inclusive, such as welcome everyone, welcome all. The second way that they can do that is, we are living in a world of multimodality, that information is not only delivered through textbook. So I think it's very important to ask, do any of the text, learning, teaching materials or video I utilize exclude or marginalize a particular group of my student? what stereotypes exist for a particular group of students. So if the teachers notice that the textbook feature more male authors, or in their curriculum, they only include male scientists or mathematicians, they can conduct their own research to diversify their sources and selection and include more information to serve a broader population of students. A third way to do it is also asking themselves, are there any kind of works that I have selected based on my own stereotypical gender roles that I play? So if they are historical writings, how can I teach students to be more critical because of what we have today is more advanced and civilized, and to be really critical of the restriction in gender roles that we used to have in the history. So those extra effort actually can ensure that all students, regardless of gender, ethnicity, language, or learning ability, are involved in discussion and involvement. The fourth way that I can think of is also for people who just entering their first year in college. So professor can ask, do I urge my first year student to be empowered and non-sexist from the beginning? So I think design a specific lesson or unit of study based on exploring with your students some issue of gender, self-images, and equality is really important. For example, a study titled Still Failing at Fairness, How Gender Bias Cheats Girls and Boys in School and What We Can Do About It reported that female physicians and surgeons earn 38% less than their male counterparts, and female lawyers earn 30% less than male lawyers. So having those truths there and have a very explicit discussion would be very helpful. And the last thing that professor can do is to ask, do I ask complicated inquiries to only a group of students and exclude others? Because research do show that male learners talk more and tend to be aggressive than female learners when teacher was a man. So we can see that all documented in research, but how to apply those research in order to catch up and update our pedagogies to serve all other non-binary student population. I think that is the work that we have to do now. It's clear that our university is taking steps to increase the inclusive campuses where all gender identity are respected and celebrated.
Yes, we are in this really exciting time, and I really thank listeners for joining us today. And I just hope that you all remember that fostering gender diversity is not only the responsibility, but is a way to create a more enriching college experience that benefits the entire educational community. Please contact us if you have ideas for upcoming stories or relevant facts for These Things Matter. You can do that by reaching out to the email diversity@vermontstate.edu. And please remember to subscribe to our channel. We're going to try and have monthly episodes, and we want you to listen to them too.